My grandfather's final words were a whispered secret. The chess book. Only you. After his funeral I found it, and inside, a hidden passbook that would unravel a lifetime of lies and reveal the family I thought I knew was built on greed.
After Granddaddy's funeral, I found his old savings passbook. Mama snatched it and threw it right in the trash can. "That's just old junk," she said. "Should have buried it with him." I silently fished it out and went to the bank. The manager froze when he saw it. "Call the police," he told the teller. "Don't go anywhere." Ezra Vance lived to be 89, and he spent 40 of those years in the same office on the 3rd floor of the administrative building at the Detroit Auto Assembly Plant. It smelled of machine oil, rubber cement, and that indescribable scent of bureaucracy that soaks into the walls of any corporate institution and never leaves, not even after a renovation. He was the head accountant. It was a job many folks considered boring, nothing but paper pushing, devoid of any thrill. But he turned it into an art form. Every digit in his ledgers stood exactly where it belonged. Every discrepancy between income and expenses was immediately discovered and recorded in a separate notebook, which he called his Journal of Anomalies, and kept in a safe, along with his most important documents. "You have to understand, Maya," he would tell me on summer evenings on the porch of his house in Belleville, setting up the pieces on a worn chessboard with a chipped corner. "Money doesn't lie. People lie. Documents get forged. Witnesses get confused. But numbers never do. If a penny doesn't add up today, a dollar won't add up tomorrow, and a million won't add up a year from now. It is like chess. One weak pawn isn't a defeat yet, but if you don't protect it in time, it will pull down your whole position." I was 12 back then, and I listened to Granddaddy the way he appreciated most. Not out of politeness, not because children are supposed to listen to their elders, but because I was genuinely interested. I asked questions, uncomfortable, sharp questions that required real answers. Not excuses like, "You'll understand when you get older." But what if a person just made a mistake, Granddaddy? An accident? An accident? Ezra moved his knight to e4. That is just a pattern we haven't recognized yet. In accounting, there are no accidents. There is a system. There are deviations from the system, and there are reasons for those deviations. Find the reason, and you will find the guilty party, or the innocent one, which is just as important. Your move. I would frown over the board, biting my lip, going over the variations. Granddaddy saw something in me that he didn't notice in the rest of the family. A stubborn honesty, an inability to accept an answer just because an adult gave it. His son Marcus, my father, was a good man, kind and decent, but soft. Too soft for the woman he married, too ready to believe in the best where he should have been preparing for the worst. And his grandson Darius, my brother, knew how to say the right words and make the right face from childhood. But his eyes always remained empty. Granddaddy had long stopped trying to find anything in them other than calculation. "Granddaddy, why do you play chess and not cards?" I asked once. "Cards are more fun. There's a thrill." "In cards, there is too much chance," he answered, taking my rook with his knight. "But in chess, everything is honest. Both sides see the whole board. No hidden cards, no surprises. The one who thinks better wins. Mate in 3 moves, by the way." In 1995, when Ezra's parents sold their brownstone in Philadelphia, the one where he grew up and left 30 years prior to work in the factories, they moved in with him to live out their final years. He accepted the money from the sale not as an inheritance, but as a responsibility, like a baton in a relay race that cannot be dropped. His mother, whose eyesight was failing and who confused the days of the week, squeezed his hand on the threshold of the Belleville house and said in that voice people use for the most important things, "You, Ezra, are smart. You will keep it safe." His father had saved all his life to have something to leave behind. "You will preserve it and make it grow." And he did preserve it. The Great Recession of 2008 swept through the country like a wildfire through dry brush, burning up savings and hopes. People lost everything overnight. 401ks turned into dust, and home values plummeted to nothing. On the television, politicians with shifting eyes explained that no one was to blame and everything would work out for the best. But Ezra, 3 months before the crash, had moved most of his savings into secure bonds and stable assets. Not because he knew about the coming collapse, and not because he had connections in Washington, but because he knew how to read numbers. The Federal Reserve reports, which he studied out of habit like other folks read the sports section with their morning coffee, showed such deviations from the norm, such impossible ratios between reserves and debts, that any literate accountant should have been alarmed. "You're lucky, Ezra," his neighbor Mr. Jenkins told him. Jenkins had lost all his savings in August, including the money set aside for his granddaughter's wedding. "You were born with a silver spoon." "What does luck have to do with it?" Ezra replied, pouring him a drink at a wake for other people's money, for other people's hopes, for a whole country that had once again been deceived by the banks. "You just had to read the documents. It was all written in black and white, only nobody wanted to look. By 2011, when a heart attack took my father Marcus right at his workplace, he died behind the wheel of his company car, not even having time to pull over or realize what was happening. Ezra's accounts held over $800,000. Smart investments, deposits with good interest rates in reliable credit unions, and a small but stable income from a rental property in Detroit that he had been leasing to the same family of teachers since '87. For a retired factory worker, this was a fortune capable of ensuring a comfortable old age for many years. For a man used to counting every penny and knowing where it came from, it was the sum of 40 years of work, the materialized proof that honesty and calculation win. My mother, Loretta, appeared at her husband's funeral in a severe black dress and with the correct expression on her face. Not too crushed by grief to cause distrust, but mournful enough so no one would doubt the sincerity of her feelings. Ezra watched his daughter-in-law over his own son's casket and thought about what Marcus had told him once in passing, over a drink when he was already quite tipsy. It was a strange story about the inheritance from Loretta's mother in Cleveland. $150,000 had evaporated somewhere between the old woman's death and the filing of the documents. Loretta's sister suspected something, even threatened to sue, but couldn't prove anything. The papers were in perfect order, and the deceased had allegedly disposed of the money herself shortly before she died. "Ezra," Loretta said after the repast, clearing the dirty dishes from the table with the businesslike dexterity that distinguishes practical women from sentimental ones, "I'm going to look after you now. You are all alone left, completely alone in this big house, and at your age, you shouldn't be without supervision." "I am not at that age yet," he answered, looking her in the eye and trying to read what was hiding behind the mask of the caring daughter-in-law. "Oh, come now, I don't mean you're feeble. Lord forbid. It's just a big house, the property needs hands. Groceries need to be brought in from the city. I'll come on weekends, help out. Marcus would have wanted this." A correct, rehearsed smile froze on her face, and Ezra saw behind it what others didn't see or didn't want to see. Because it is easier to believe in human kindness than to acknowledge the obvious. 40 years of working with numbers had taught him to recognize false notes not just in documents, but in voices, in gestures, in words chosen too carefully, in the pauses between phrases. Loretta looked at him the same way she had looked at his parents' apartment before convincing Marcus to sell it for the needs of the family, appraisingly estimating the value. But he said nothing. In our community, especially back then, rejecting help from a daughter-in-law meant looking like an ungrateful, senile old man who didn't appreciate care and pushed family away. Social norms required accepting the care with dignity, saying thank you, and asking no unnecessary questions. So Ezra accepted, understanding how it would end, but also understanding that he had neither proof nor allies yet. For the first 2 years, Loretta acted cautiously, taking her time, testing the waters. Groceries from the city, prescriptions filled, help with paperwork that became more complicated and tangled every year. She created the image of a devoted daughter-in-law as carefully as a good accountant creates a flawless balance sheet, where every item is supported by documents and every expense is justified by necessity. Neighbors were touched when they met her on the driveway. That Loretta, God bless her, she didn't abandon the old man, drives down every weekend. The family doctor praised her care during appointments. Even my brother Darius, who was never known for filial affection and hadn't shown up in Belleville for years, started visiting more often. True, his conversation was mostly about Granddaddy's house and the land by the creek, which could be sold profitably to developers from Ann Arbor. Ezra waited. He didn't know exactly when the real game would begin, when his daughter-in-law would move from preparation to active measures, but he felt its approach as clearly as he had felt the approach of the recession months before the official announcement. He felt it in small signs, in slips of the tongue, in how Loretta asked about his health more often and his opinion less often. It all started with a power of attorney for managing accounts. So you don't have to run to the bank for every little thing, Ezra. Not at your age. Not with these roads. Then came the doctor visits. Let's check your health. At your age, it's important. You're long overdue for a checkup. Diagnoses multiplied with frightening speed, appearing in his medical chart after every visit to the clinic. Memory problems, early signs of age-related dementia, the necessity of constant observation and control. Ezra tried to object, to prove he was in full health and a clear mind, but every objection was diligently recorded by the nurse as a symptom of confusion, aggressive denial, and inadequate reaction to the care of loved ones. In 2013, the probate court declared him largely incapacitated based on medical reports and the testimony of his guardian. Loretta became his official conservator, gaining the right to manage his finances and property. Ezra remembered sitting in the courtroom, small, stuffy, with dusty blinds on the windows, looking at the judge, who didn't even lift her eyes from the papers as she monotonously read the decision. Medical reports, the daughter-in-law's testimony, notes from the clinic, a character reference from the local precinct. Everything was filed flawlessly, like a good financial report where every number is confirmed, every conclusion justified, and there is absolutely nothing to nitpick. "Don't worry, Pops," Loretta said after the hearing, leading him to the car by the arm so solicitously that a passerby would have been touched by the picture. "This is for your own good. Now I can take care of you properly." He remained silent. 40 years of work had taught him the most important thing. When the opponent thinks he has won, when he relaxes and stops watching the little things, that is exactly when he becomes careless. And carelessness always leaves traces. The following years turned into a methodical, systematic looting. Not rough, not obvious, but quiet, paper-based, hidden behind a pile of receipts and checks. Money left the accounts by the thousands. First for treatment and necessary procedures, then for urgent repairs to the house and replacing the heating system, then simply without explanation, because a conservator has the right to dispose of the ward's funds at their discretion. Ezra kept records in an old notebook he hid under his mattress, shoving it deep against the wall. Dates, amounts, document numbers, discrepancies between what Loretta said and where the money actually went. He couldn't stop the theft. The court decision had stripped him of that possibility, but he could document it. He could turn it into an evidence base, into an indictment that would someday be read by those whose job it is to read such documents. Meanwhile, Darius opened a company called Huron Investments with a loud name and a vague line of business. He rented an office in Detroit and bragged during his rare visits to Granddaddy about successful ventures and promising projects. Ezra recognized his own money in these investments by the transfer amounts, by the dates, by how precisely they coincided with the disappearance of funds from his accounts. I visited rarely. Mom always found a reason why now was a bad time. "Granddaddy needs rest," the doctors insist. "He had a hard day. Better not disturb him. He won't recognize you anyway. You'll just get upset." But when I did manage to break through these barriers and arrive without warning, giving Mom no time to prepare, Ezra saw in my eyes the same bewilderment he had felt 15 years ago looking at Loretta. Something is wrong here. Something doesn't add up. The penny isn't in its place. "Granddaddy, how are you?" I would ask, sitting next to him on the sofa, peering into his face. and he felt me searching for signs of the dementia Mom kept harping about, searching and not finding them. "Maya," he would answer, lowering his voice to a whisper, listening for footsteps in the next room. "Remember I taught you, if a penny doesn't add up today, tomorrow $1 won't add up," I finished. "I remember, Granddaddy. I remember everything. Remember, and remember my book, My System by Nimzovich." In 2014, while Loretta went to Detroit to file yet another authorization to manage his property, Ezra convinced his neighbor, Old Man Rivers, an old fishing buddy he could still trust, to drive him to Monroe. It was a county center about 25 miles from Belleville, a place Loretta never visited and likely barely knew existed. There, in a small bank branch with a single window and a line of 3 elderly ladies, he opened a new account and transferred $800,000 into it. Everything he had managed to save before losing control of his finances. Everything left from 40 years of labor and his parents' inheritance. He hid the passbook inside the hollowed-out volume of My System, the chess textbook by Nimzovich that we had discussed hundreds of times, analyzing complex positions on the porch on summer evenings. "In the endgame, the one who knows how to wait wins," he told the bookshelves, closing the hiding place and returning the book to its spot between Capablanca and Alekhine. He waited 10 years, and he got what he was waiting for, even if not in his lifetime. The funeral was held on a Thursday, short and businesslike, organized by Loretta with the same practical efficiency with which she organized everything else in her life. October rain washed out the dirt roads, turning them into orange slush. The preacher hurried to finish the service, glancing at his watch. Darius was 40 minutes late, blaming traffic coming out of the city, although there is no traffic on a weekday morning. After the repast, when the neighbors had dispersed, taking leftovers in Tupperware and memories of the deceased with them, when the house emptied and went quiet, I slipped, unnoticed, into Granddaddy's study, a small room with bookshelves to the ceiling, smelling of old paper. I remembered his words, spoken 2 weeks ago in a weak, breaking voice, but with unexpected strength in his grip. "The book, the chess book, Nimzovich. Only you, Maya. I only trust you." My System stood on the 3rd shelf between Capablanca and Alekhine, dusty but not forgotten. The book felt too heavy for its size. Inside, a hiding place had been cut out, a neat rectangle in the thickness of the pages, and in it lay a worn savings passbook in an old cardboard cover. I didn't have time to examine anything or even open it. A floorboard creaked behind me, and I spun around. Mom stood in the doorway blocking the exit, and the expression on her face changed rapidly, like weather before a storm. Surprise, recognition, fear, and finally, cold, calculated anger. "What are you doing here?" Loretta crossed the room in 3 quick strides, snatched the book from my hands with a sharp, predatory movement, and threw it into the trash can, standing by the door to the kitchen. "That's old junk. Should have buried it with him. And stop digging through his trash. We're selling the house anyway." I stood in the middle of the kitchen, looking at the trash can where the passbook had just fallen, and felt something inside me shift, realign, and take a new position. Just like chess pieces change formation after an unexpected move by the opponent. Mom had already returned to the living room, where Darius was scrolling through real estate listings on his phone, and their voices drifted in, muffled and businesslike. 2 people discussing a deal, not relatives who just buried a grandfather. "Mom, I think I'm going to head out," I said, appearing in the doorway. "I'm really tired." "Of course, baby girl." Loretta turned around with the expression of a caring mother, which she knew how to put on instantly, like a familiar mask. "You go on, get some rest. It was a heavy day." "Maya, want a ride to the highway?" Darius didn't even lift his eyes from the screen. "Buses aren't running." "No thanks. I drove." I walked out of the house, got behind the wheel, and sat for 5 minutes without starting the engine, looking at the lit windows. There, behind the curtains, my mother and brother continued to discuss something, leaning over a table with papers. Then I drove to Detroit. 2 hours on an empty evening highway, and the whole way, one thing spun in my head. Why was Mom so scared? Why did she snatch the book so sharply, so greedily? I wasn't holding an old piece of paper. I was holding a loaded gun. I just didn't know it yet. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in my one-bedroom apartment in Midtown, staring at the ceiling and going over the events of the last few weeks like counting beads, one after another, again and again. The visit to Granddaddy 2 weeks ago. His words, spoken in a hurried whisper. The book, Maya. Chess book, Nimzovich. Only you. His fingers squeezing my hand with unexpected strength. Where does an 89-year-old man get that much strength? And his gaze, clear, meaningful, not at all like the gaze of a person with dementia. Granddaddy was in his right mind, I said aloud into the darkness of the room, and my own voice seemed strange to me, hoarse from lack of sleep. He knew what he was doing. 8 years of working as an associate counsel in a construction firm had taught me to recognize lies in documents, inconsistencies in dates, suspicious signatures, numbers that don't add up. But now I was applying these skills to my own family, and it made me feel sick, like seasickness. Why did Mom get angry instead of just waving it off? If the passbook really was junk, a useless piece of paper from the last century, why snatch it with such fury? Why throw it in the trash immediately? A normal reaction to an old passbook is indifference, mild irritation, at most, a condescending chuckle. Granddad completely lost his mind saving all this trash. At 3 a.m, I got up, got dressed, and left the apartment. My car, a beat-up Chevrolet that made a sound like a dying animal every time I turned left, started on the 3rd try and rolled through the empty streets toward the freeway. 2 hours of night driving. Headlights snatched lane markers, rare signs, and silhouettes of trees on the shoulder out of the darkness. I thought about Granddaddy, about how he taught me to play chess on the porch, about his favorite saying regarding the penny that doesn't add up, about his professional meticulousness as an accountant for whom every digit must have an explanation. 40 years at the plant, not a single error in his reports. A reputation as a man who sees discrepancy where others see order. Such a man wouldn't hide a bank book and a chess book for no reason, out of senile whim. Look 3 moves ahead, he used to tell me, moving his queen. Think, why did the opponent make this move? What do they want? What are they afraid of? What was Mom afraid of? I arrived in Belleville at 5 a.m. when the sky in the east was just beginning to turn gray, filling with that cold pre-dawn light that only happens in October, transparent and merciless. Granddaddy's house stood dark and silent, with curtains drawn. The spare key lay under the 3rd step of the porch, our secret, which Mom never knew about. I entered, trying not to make the floorboards creak, although there was no one in the house. Loretta and Darius had left yesterday evening right after me. The trash can stood in the kitchen, full to the brim. Napkins, apple cores, leftovers from the funeral potato salad, some papers. I squatted down and started digging through the contents, feeling ridiculous. 31 years old, a law degree, and here I am digging through garbage at 5 a.m. like a stray cat. The passbook lay almost at the very bottom, pressed down by a crumpled newspaper and potato peels. I pulled it out, wiped it on my coat sleeve, and examined it carefully for the first time. The cover was old and worn, a typical old-school savings book, millions of which gathered dust in the drawers of senior citizens. But the account number inside looked strange. Too long, a purely modern format, nothing like the numbers they printed in the 70s or 80s. And then I found the note, a tiny piece of paper, folded several times and shoved into the spine of the binding so deep you wouldn't notice it by accident. Granddaddy's handwriting, small and neat, the way he signed all my birthday cards. Account number 42307, Emster 817.564328. Request, full history. Trust no one in the family. Only you, baby girl. Baby girl. That's what he called me in childhood when we sat over the chessboard and I was losing yet again. And he would comfort me. It's all right, baby girl. You'll get it next time. I photographed everything, the passbook, the note, the account number, and immediately uploaded the pictures to cloud storage. Legal practice had trained me in paranoia. Originals disappear, files get deleted, but cloud copies with a timestamp are evidence that is hard to dispute. Returning to Detroit, I went to sleep at 7 in the morning and woke up to a phone call at 10. Mom. Her voice was soft, caring, with those cooing intonations I remembered from childhood. Maya, honey, how are you? Yesterday was a hard day, I know. Did you get some rest? More or less. That's good. That's wonderful. Pause. A slight cough. You didn't take anything from Granddaddy's house, did you? We need to keep everything for the appraisers, you understand? Before the sale. Every little thing can affect the price. I only took the chess book, I answered. For a keepsake. Pause. Longer. Tense. Okay, of course. Just listen, Maya. Don't take to heart everything Granddaddy said lately. He wasn't well, you know that. The doctor said progressive dementia. He said such nonsense sometimes. Poor thing. He was completely out of it. I remember, Mama. Good girl. At 7 in the evening, Darius called. For the first time in 6 months, not counting the obligatory Happy New Year texts. His voice was buddy-buddy, relaxed, as if we talked every day, as if those months of silence hadn't happened. Maya, hey, listen, Mom and I talked everything over. She's going to handle the house. There's a lot of red tape there. You know how she loves that stuff. I'll put my lawyers on the land issue. We can make a nice profit if we structure it right. You don't need to worry about anything at all. We'll handle it all. Thanks, Darius. Don't mention it. And hey, Maya, you know Mom, don't argue with her unnecessarily. It's not worth it. You'll just fray your nerves, and for what? 2 calls in one day, separated by 9 hours, too precise for a coincidence. I recorded both on my voice memo app. Thankfully, Michigan is a one-party consent state for recording conversations you participate in. Mom was playing the caring parent. My brother was playing the voice of reason. A classic scheme. One presses on emotions, the other on logic. I saw this at work when a CEO and a CFO synchronously explained to auditors why the numbers in the reports didn't match. The next day, I took a personal day. In 8 years of work, I had almost never used my vacation time, so my boss didn't object. I drove to Monroe, a small town 25 miles from Belleville. 1 traffic light on the central square, a diner across from the courthouse, a bank branch in a 2-story building with a sign faded by the sun to total unreadability. The young teller smiled welcomingly, took the passbook, my ID, Granddaddy's death certificate, and the documents proving kinship. And the smile vanished from her face so fast I involuntarily flinched. The girl apologized, picked up the internal phone, whispered something while glancing at me with the expression one uses for a person who brought a bomb into the bank. 20 minutes of waiting in a plastic chair by the window, posters about IRAs and loans. The security guard, a heavy man named Anthony if his badge was to be believed, stared mournfully at the bowl of candy by the counter. Then a man in a good suit appeared, introduced himself as Mr. Sterling, the branch manager, and invited me into his office. The account is flagged in the security system, Sterling said when the door closed behind us. It wasn't opened in the old days, as one might think from the cover, but in 2014, current balance. He took a piece of paper, wrote a number, and slid it across the desk. I looked at the number and made a sound I couldn't describe myself. Something between a sob and a laugh. $1,850,000, belonging to a grandfather who lived in a country house and wore the same work jacket for 20 years. There is something else, Sterling continued, and his face became completely grim. In 2018, someone tried to access this account with a power of attorney. The signature on the document did not match the specimen in our archive. The name on the power of attorney was Loretta Vance. 3 days later, a stranger called me. An elderly voice, but firm, with the intonation of a man used to speaking in courtrooms. Maya Vance? My name is Elijah Thorne, attorney at law. Your grandfather and I played chess for 40 years. He left me instructions to contact you after his death once you found the passbook. I assume you found it. Thorne's office was located in an old house in Corktown. Creaky stairs, high ceilings, the smell of old law books. On the wall hung a photograph. Granddaddy and Thorne over a chessboard, both about 30 years younger, both smiling. Ezra never made baseless accusations, Thorne said, laying a thick folder on the desk. He came to me with documents. For 4 years, we collected this dossier. I flipped through the pages, and Granddaddy's voice sounded in every line. His handwriting, his phrasing, his accountant's precision. Copies of powers of attorney next to samples of his real signature. Bank statements with notes. Did not authorize. Signature forged. A log of every suspicious transfer. And a separate page with notes about my brother's company, Huron Investments, through which over $500,000 had passed in 5 years. Darius had signed the documents. He knew the origin of every dollar, and at the very end, a short note dated 2003, written in Granddaddy's hand. 1997. Loretta tells Marcus about difficult relationship with her mother. 2002. Mother dies. Marcus mentions oddities with inheritance. Quickly goes silent. 2003. Loretta buys a car, does renovations. Where is the money from? I looked up from the yellowed paper at Thorne, who sat opposite, hands folded on the desk, patiently waiting for me to digest what I had read. Outside his window, Michigan Avenue hummed. Buses, voices of passers-by, the usual Detroit bustle. But here, in this room with high ceilings and the smell of old books, time had stopped somewhere between 2002 and today. He knew, I said finally. He knew about Grandma, about Mom's mother. Ezra Vance noticed everything. Thorne nodded. It was his profession to see discrepancies. When your father once mentioned the oddities with his mother-in-law's inheritance, your grandfather remembered and started watching. He never drew conclusions without proof, but he knew how to wait. Detective Hooks, a woman who had been handling economic crimes for 15 years, told me things at our first meeting that burned into my memory for a long time. Financial fraud against the elderly is an epidemic, and the perpetrators are almost always relatives. The victims are trapped. They depend on those who rob them. They love those who hurt them. When they try to tell the truth, no one believes them. The investigation gathered momentum. Hooks tracked the money trail with the persistence of a hound dog that caught a scent, and she found interesting things. Darius Vance turned out to be not just a son receiving pocket money from Mommy. His LLC, Huron Investments, created in 2011, had funneled over $500,000, allegedly investments, loans, consulting services. The money came from Loretta in small tranches to avoid attracting attention and was then cashed out or invested in real estate. Your brother signed the documents, executed the deals, made the transactions, Hooks explained at our second meeting, spreading copies of contracts on the table. He knew the origin of every dollar. This isn't passive receipt, this is active complicity. I looked at my brother's signatures under the contracts and remembered how he called me after the funeral. Don't argue with Mom, bragging about his investments and business sense. Darius, who had looked down on me all his life, the little sister with her head in the clouds with her books and chess. Turns out, while I was in the clouds, he was helping rob our grandfather. I need your help, Hooks said. Full cooperation. That means keeping your mouth shut. Don't warn your mother. Don't conflict with your brother. Act as usual. We need to make sure they don't destroy evidence or coordinate their stories. For 2 weeks, I lived a double life. I went to Sunday dinner at Mom's, ate her dry chicken and potatoes, listened to Loretta discuss real estate prices, and complain about the realtor wanting too big a commission. Listened to Darius talk about a promising project he planned to invest in. I smiled, nodded, asked for the salad recipe. Baby girl, I know we didn't always get along, Loretta said at one of those dinners, pulling me into the kitchen while Darius watched football. But we are family. Granddaddy would have wanted us to stick together. I looked into those caring eyes and saw a woman who had been robbing Granddaddy for 15 years, declared him insane, and was now trying to appropriate his house. I smiled back. Of course, Mama. Family is everything. Granddaddy taught me patience. In chess, the winner isn't the one who makes brilliant moves, but the one who doesn't make mistakes. Wait until the opponent slips up. On Thursday morning, Detective Hooks called, voice calm, businesslike. Maya, today we are executing the arrest warrants, both simultaneously at 7 a.m. I learned the details later. Loretta opened the door in her robe, cup in hand. Must have just woken up. Seeing the uniforms and badges, she lost control of her face for a moment, but quickly pulled herself together. "This is a mistake," she said in that reasonable tone she always used to persuade people. "My father-in-law was mentally unwell. It's officially confirmed. I cared for him for 15 years. We have 4 years of documented evidence," Hooks replied. "A notarized statement from the victim, bank records of attempted account access, handwriting analysis. This isn't a mistake, ma'am. These are consequences." At the same moment on the other side of the city, police entered Darius's office. He was in the middle of a meeting with partners discussing another investment project. When people in uniform walked into the conference room, his face turned an ashen gray. They walked him out in handcuffs in front of his colleagues and clients. The trial at the Wayne County Circuit Court lasted several months. Loretta's lawyer built the defense on Ezra's incapacity, but the prosecution brought in 3 independent experts, psychiatrists and neurologists who had examined Granddaddy over the years. All 3 confirmed no signs of dementia. He was of sound mind until his last days. The decision to limit his legal capacity was based on false information provided by Loretta herself. In the middle of the trial, Darius's lawyer reached out to me through an intermediary, an offer. Darius was ready to testify against his mother in exchange for a lighter sentence. He claimed he was manipulated, that he didn't know the whole picture, that he was a victim too. I listened and replied, "Tell my brother that our grandfather taught me chess, and he used to say, 'Pawns don't negotiate.'" The prosecution also rejected the deal. The documents were irrefutable. The day of the verdict was a cold one in March. The courtroom was half empty. A few journalists from local papers, Detective Hooks, Attorney Thorne, and me. Before the reading, the judge allowed excerpts from the victim impact statement, Ezra's document from 2022, to be read. The court clerk's voice sounded monotone, but Granddaddy's words filled the room with a specific weight. "My daughter-in-law stole my money and my dignity. She convinced doctors I was losing my mind while she drained my accounts. She isolated me from the world, controlled my every step, turned my life into a prison. No one believed me, but I was not insane. I knew what was being done to me. I leave this record so that one day the truth will come out." I looked at my mother, sitting behind the defense table with a stone face, and didn't feel what I expected. No triumph, no gloating. Only a quiet sense of completion. Verdict. Loretta Vance, 6 years in a state correctional facility. Darius Vance, 3 years, full restitution, asset forfeiture. 2 days later, I went back to Thorne's office. He took an envelope from the safe, my name written on it in familiar handwriting. "He asked me to give you this after it was all over," the lawyer said. "He was sure you would handle it." The letter was dated a month before Granddaddy died. My dear baby girl. If you are reading this, it means you found the passbook. It means you followed the trail, means you did exactly what I knew you would do. Your brother was always his mother's son. I watched him grow up adopting her values, greed, cunning, contempt for those he considered weaker. I hoped he would change, but hope is a bad strategy. An accountant shouldn't take even relatives at their word. Your mother never loved me. She liked what I represented: stability, a house, money. When your father died, she saw an opportunity in me. A lonely old man with money. She thought I was easy prey. She was mistaken. I understood her plan almost from the very beginning. 40 years I caught fraud at the plant. Did she really think I wouldn't notice my own money disappearing? But I was trapped. She got legal powers, convinced everyone I had lost my mind. Every time I tried to speak the truth, she tightened the noose. So I did what I do best. I documented. I prepared. I waited. Truth is patient, Maya. It knows how to wait longer than any lie. You were always different. You came to me not because you expected something, but because you wanted to. You played chess for the sake of the game. You asked questions your mother hated. That is why I chose you. Forgive me for the burden I placed on you. I am sorry you had to expose your own family, but I knew you were strong enough. Live well, grandbaby. Use this money for something real. Be happy. Love, your granddaddy Ezra. P.S. Remember our last game? I mated you in 6 moves. Now you have delivered checkmate for me. The game is over. We won. I cried reading that letter, but they weren't tears of grief. It was something more complex, hard to name. Gratitude, pride, sadness for his lonely years of struggle, and a slow, painful healing. 6 months later, I quit the law firm, paid off all my student loans, and bought a small space in the historic Eastern Market District of Detroit. A narrow shop with high ceilings and large windows facing a quiet courtyard. I opened a bookstore. I named it The Knight's Move. Granddaddy would have appreciated the chess pun. Inside were wooden shelves, soft armchairs for reading, racks with classics and modern prose. In the far corner stood a chess table, 2 chairs, a board with pieces set up. Sometimes customers sat down to play. Sometimes I joined them. Above the table hung a photo of Granddaddy in a simple frame, the same one from Thorne's office, where he and the lawyer were bent over a chessboard. Both young, both smiling. And next to it, a small plaque with his favorite saying, which I had ordered from a workshop. Truth is patient. It knows how to wait longer than any lie. Loretta wrote letters from prison. Long, rambling, full of accusations and demands for forgiveness. She said her daughter betrayed the family, that this was all a misunderstanding, that she was a good daughter-in-law. I read the first letter and then stopped opening the envelopes. Some doors, once closed, should stay closed. Sometimes in the evenings, locking up the store and turning off the lights over the shelves, I would sit at the chess table, look at Granddaddy's photo, and set up the pieces for a new game. And it seemed to me that somewhere out there, beyond the limits of this room, beyond the limits of time and memory, he was smiling. With that same smile I remembered from childhood when we sat on the porch in Belleville, and he would say, "In the end game, the one who knows how to wait wins." I knew how to wait. He taught me that. If you liked my story and want to hear more, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. If you'd like to support me, you can do it through Super Thanks. It would mean a lot. In the comments, tell me which city you're watching from and what time it is so I can see how far my story reaches. I've added 2 more life stories on the screen just for you. Click one now and let's keep spending time together. Much love. See you soon.
If this story of courage, patience, and truth moved you, like, comment, and subscribe for more tales where silence speaks louder than words. We'd love to hear from you. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done in Maya's place? Want to support heartfelt storytelling? You can send a small donation to help us keep uncovering stories that need to be told. Tune in tomorrow for another journey into the human heart. With gratitude, Whispers of Fate.